They're one of the big three, aren't they? It goes Boss pedals, Electro-Harmonics, and then MXR. They were started by a Keith Barr and a Terry Sherwood in Rochester, New York in 1972. They were high school buddies. They used to fix mixing desks and guitar amps and musical equipment. And it was one of their friends at high school that suggested they should call themselves MXR. That's mixer without the vowels. I imagine he was smoking a big doob when he suggested that. The first original design was the Phase 90. I've not got one of them, but I do have an empty case for an Eddie Van Halen Phase 90. As you do. That was followed by the Blue Box Octaver, and then the Distortion Plus. I used to have one of them, but I sold it. I've since made a clone of it using the GMR Spares miniature tag board, and I've even sorted out the volume drop issue by changing some of the diodes and one of the resistors. If you ever buy another one, we'll do the mod to it, and I'll show you how to do it on this channel. You just gotta subscribe. After the Phase 90, the Blue Box Octaver, the Distortion Plus, and the Micro Amp, came the Dyna Comp. I've got one of them, and I did a mod for it. It's called the Attack mod. I'll explain about that in a minute. I also have an MXR flanger, but Dyna Comp today. It's one of the classic pedals that has always been a little bit of a disappointment to me, at least 50% of the time. You see, I come to compressors from a studio environment, so I like a little bit of attack on my compressors. I like to let the transients through and not squish them to death. You know, it works for some players. It seems like everyone in the 1970s was obsessed by sustain. All your fuzz pedals were called sustainers and had sustain controls. And all your Les Pauls weighed more than one of the moons of Jupiter. And Nigel Tufnell could go and have something to eat and come back and find that his Les Paul was still ringing. You had the E-bow and the Gizmo and the violin bow. So obviously the Dyna Comp was designed with that in mind, to keep the notes going, but keep the signal clean. A stock Dyna Comp is perfect for that. You know, think Lowell George from Little Feat, or Bonnie Raitt, both slide players. You kind of need that sound. Or think Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, big soaring solos. Great stuff, and I love it, half of the time. But I kind of want that chimey chord thing, you know, the sparkle thing, the bit that lets the transient through and then squishes the ringy bit. More 1980s, more how Stephen Street would mix it, more Nile Rodgers, more chicken picking. So I needed to find out how it worked. I knew that a Ross compressor was the same design, and I knew a Keeley compressor was based on a Ross compressor, and I'd seen a Keeley compressor with an attack knob. So if I got all the schematics and cross-referenced them, I could find out how to do the modification to the Dyna Comp. In the case of my semi-modern Dyna Comp, it's resistor number 8 on the PCB. That controls the attack. If you've got a vintage MXR Dyna Comp, don't mod it. Stop drilling holes in things. If you really want to do this mod, sell the pedal and buy a cheapo 90s one like I did. Mass produced in China. Stop modifying rare and valuable things. There's just no point. The value of resistor number 8 is 150 kiloohms, and if you reduce that value, you get that chiminess coming through because you increase the attack time. It was time for me to do some experiments, and I found that there was 3 ways I could do the mod and deliver it to you lot. A potentiometer seems like the logical choice, and that's what I use for my initial tests. But there are many issues with using a potentiometer. The first one, what value do you use? You need a control that goes to a maximum resistance of 150 kiloohms. You can't just use a pot in place of the resistor, because when you set the pot to 0, you get 0 ohms, and that would short the transistor that we're controlling. So you need a resistor in series with the pot, and I found that a 30k resistor gave me the perfect amount of attack. So then I would need a potentiometer that was 120 kiloohms, and they don't exist. So you have to go up to the next size. That would be 220 or 250 kiloohms. But after your control gets past 150k, it doesn't do anything. So most of the travel of the pot would have no effect. And you lot wouldn't like that. So then I would need to put a resistor in parallel with the potentiometer, a 120 kiloohm resistor. That would stop the potentiometer going above 120 kiloohms. That's how resistors in parallel work. And just to make it even more of a faff, that 220 or 250k potentiometer would have to be a reverse logarithmic potentiometer. And they're not that easy to find. If you don't use a reverse logarithmic potentiometer, the sweep of the attack control wouldn't be even across the travel of the pot. You can buy them. You can get them from a company called Bitsbox. They're very good for obscure potentiometers. But they cost about 3 times as much as a normal pot. And there aren't that many of them. So if they run out, where else do I get one from? The last problem with using a potentiometer is the application we're using it for. If we were making a studio compressor, being able to control the attack at lots of different speeds would be perfect. But we're modifying a guitar pedal. There are only 2 settings, fast and slow, so all the way off or all the way on. So you don't really need a potentiometer. So your second option is just to change the resistor. You could just change it from a 150k resistor to a 30k resistor. It would mean that you couldn't change between the different values. You would either get slow or fast. Maybe you could buy 2 Dyna Comps. If you sell your vintage 70s one, you could afford 3 Dyna Comps. Your third option is the option that I chose. Use a toggle switch. I used a double pole, double throw toggle switch. That means that you can solder a 150 kiloohms resistor to one side of the switch and a 30 kiloohm resistor to the other side. You just run 2 wires off into where resistor number 8 went. It does mean that you lose the ability to use a battery with your pedal, because when we drilled the hole, that's where the switch goes, in the battery compartment. There's nowhere else it fits. But it is 2023. If you're nervous about drilling your pedal, you'll find a link down below to a drilling template. You'll also find instructions of how to do this modification using a toggle switch. And I suppose those instructions will be quite handy if you're planning to do the modification any other way. It'll help you locate resistor number 8 or R8. Those downloads in the description are free at the moment. I can't guarantee that forever. So get them while they're hot. One day, you might have to sign up to my Patreon to get these kinds of things. We'll see how we go, shall we? There's a really good way of stopping me from starting a Patreon though. And that's to sling us a quid through PayPal in one of the links down below. Think about it like I'm a busker and you've walked past me in the street. But instead of me strumming the guitar and singing Wonderwall, I'm telling you how to modify pedals. So just chucking me a quid helps me out greatly. You could also buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. It keeps the cameras rolling and the info flowing.